Howdy. So y'all are supposed to say howdy.
Howdy.
All right, that's what we do at Texas A&M, right? That's a standard greeting. So every presentation, if you come to Texas A&M, every presentation will start with howdy. So thank you, Deanna. Okay, so we're here to share a little bit with you about how we have set up Qualtrax to, can everyone hear me okay? Okay. To meet our management review requirements, and then we're going to have some fun with Excel, because once we get the data from Qualtrax, we put it into Excel. So Cullyn's going to go over that. He's our in-house Excel expert at, we call ourselves TVMDL because that's a big long name. But anyway, so this is what you're here. You're here to learn how TVMDL uses Qualtrax to prepare management review. So some of the things that we're going to talk about today are the requirements. So we're ISO 17025 accredited, and we are also accredited by AAVLD. So all the acronyms, that means the American Association of Veterinary Laboratory Diagnosticians. It's the accreditation from AAVLD is based on ISO 17025 standards. And then we're going to show you some finalized Excel reports. So we put our data into Qualtrax. Then we get it out of Qualtrax and we put it into Excel. And we'll show you how we do that and how we set up Qualtrax and all of our workflows to meet those needs and those requirements. So we have custom fields. We have shared custom fields across multiple workflows. That's how we accomplish this. And then we're going to show you some of the workflows that we have created. Just some snapshots. We're not going to go through the creation of the workflows, but just some screenshots of what we have in those workflows now. And then we'll show you how to create the reports that we created through Report Designer, and then exporting that data into Excel, and then we'll actually demonstrate the Excel piece. We use pivot tables to summarize the data for management review. A little bit about TVMDL. We have 4 locations in Texas. Our main lab is in College Station, Texas, on the campus of Texas A&M University. We also have 3 other labs. We have a lab in Amarillo. It's a little bit smaller, but it's also considered a full-service lab. And then we have 2 labs in Gonzales and Center, Texas. Interestingly enough, you'll notice that Center, Texas is not in the center of Texas. That's the name of the town. And those are small labs, and mostly just serve our poultry industry. The poultry industry in Texas is very large, and especially in those regions. So those are regional labs for the poultry industry. What do we do in veterinary diagnostics? So is there any other veterinary diagnostic labs in here? All right, so we have one other representative. So what do we do? Well, we serve companion animals. We do your testing on your pets, dogs and cats and horses. A lot of our business is the disease surveillance of food production animals. So your cows, your pigs, and of course poultry. I guess if I was a veterinarian, I would be saying swine, but I'm not a veterinarian. So how many employees do we have? This is just giving you an idea. So in our College Station lab, we have about 100 employees, about 30 in Amarillo, and then in Center and Gonzales, we have 5 people in Center and 4 people in Gonzales. So those 4 people and 5 people are very busy. They do a lot of tests. Mostly they do the surveillance test for the poultry industry. So we are a full-service medical diagnostic lab. What does that mean? Basically, it means that we will, same as human diagnostics, if anyone's in the healthcare field. We have a necropsy, which is basically animal autopsy, if you're not familiar with that term. And then all the other sections, clinical pathology, serology, histopathology, we're in diagnostics. We're trying to determine the cause of a disease or the death of an animal. So just to give you a little bit of background about what we do, we also call these disciplines or sections. So you'll see in our Qualtrax setup how that comes into play. We have about 700 submissions a day. So our clients are all over the state of Texas, throughout the country, and even throughout the world. We get about 700 submissions a day, could have multiple specimens. We do about over 200,000 cases a year. And we offer about over 600 diagnostic tests. So just a background of what we do and what we're trying to do every day. So you can see with these numbers of cases worked and these number of tests, it's really important to have a very solid quality management system, because we want to make sure that what we're producing is quality work And when it goes out to our clients, we want accurate, reliable results. They're depending on us to do the testing, produce the results, and it can have repercussions. So, for example, if we say that a bull is positive for a disease that can't be treated, can't be cured, oftentimes that bull is euthanized. And if you're a rancher, that's your livelihood, that could mean big bucks. So we want to make sure that if we say it's positive and they're euthanizing their bull, that we have the right results. So a little bit about why we have a quality system. So we have multiple accreditations. I mentioned AAVLD in ISO 17025. We are also a level 1 laboratory for the National Animal Health Laboratory Network. So they certify us based on our other accreditations and proficiency testing. Proficiency testing is a big part of our accreditation for the NOLN. And what we do there is, in the event of an animal or disease outbreak, we would be one of the testing labs. So we have biosafety level 3 labs. In an event of an outbreak, we would be one of the testing laboratories. We are also accredited by the RMTC, which is the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium. So our ISO 17025 accreditation is specific for our analytical chemistry lab, specifically our drug testing lab. So we do drug testing on racehorses. And the RMTC is a second level of that ISO 17025 accreditation. We participate in proficiency tests specifically for animal drug testing in the racing industry. A little bit about our quality management system history. So about in 2006, we developed our quality management system for our initial AAVLD accreditation. It was a basic quality system. You had a quality manual and some basic procedures that said basically you have to follow our procedures, right? So had the quality manual, you had the procedures that say follow procedures, and we basically have evolved from there. It was manual processes, physical paper, so moving the paper around, getting all of the written signatures, and we managed this with access databases. So we had a few access databases for document control, corrective and preventive action, and then for maintenance, equipment maintenance and calibration records. Basically, we had 2 full-time people, and all they did was manage the access databases. Document control was actually a single full-time person with assistance from other people in QA that would, take old revisions, replace it with new revisions, pass paper around to get approvals that way. So then, in 2013, we obtained Qualtrax. Just as a side note, the 2 people that manage the access databases left on their own shortly after that for other reasons, and with the implementation of Qualtrax, we did not replace them. We didn't have to. Qualtrax took the place for us of 2 full-time people. So how did we implement it? We decided to do a gradual implementation. We actually put one section in at a time. So I listed those sections earlier, those different testing disciplines. We imported one section at a time. So each section has their own SOPs, their own worksheets. We put one at a time in, and it took about a year. So we were fully implemented in a year. We decided that was the best approach. Also, around that same time, we acquired a new LIMS. And so we figured it would be very unpopular with employees to implement the new LIMS and Qualtrax all at the same time. So the new LIMS was required by the A&M system because of security reasons. So we let that take precedence. It got implemented, and then we brought on Qualtrax gradually. Looking back, we think that was a really good way to do it. People got used to it a little bit at a time and change a little bit at a time. We saw immediate benefits. Those of you may be new to the system, probably those who have it, but we saw immediate benefits in the areas of document control, training, and especially record control. So keeping up with these things in a manual system was difficult. I think when we did internal audits, it's probably safe to say that training records were never correct. There was always an issue with training. We were writing that up every year. Since the implementation of Qualtrax, that basically has gone away. The training and testing module has really worked for us very well. And then, of course, record control. All right, so we implemented Qualtrax at first, got all of our sections in there, and then we started creating our workflows. And it was interesting watching this, watching things today and the discussion of the, was it best in class workflows? Yeah, that would have been really great back in 2013, 2014, because I was looking in the book at all of the ones I have now. I'm like, oh, we already have all these, or most of these that are relevant to us. So I think that's fantastic. I think that Qualtrax has really come a long way even since we've got it. It's a great product. And so, but we've created all of these workflows, and some of them, we had lessons learned along the way. Like, well, that was a really bad way to create a workflow. And so what did the workflows do? Well, eventually they replaced our access databases, right? We don't need those anymore. Thank goodness, because it was very subject to corruption, and I don't know if anybody's familiar with access, but we were always worried it was going to fail and then we would lose everything. So it replaced the physical paper. So in this day of paperless initiatives, our management definitely thought that was a good idea. No physical routing. So we had folders, had documents in there with posted flags. We had student workers that just carried folders around the building, get people's signatures. Probably sounds familiar to some of you, so the fact that we don't have that anymore was just great. Then we had to start collecting our data from the workflows. So once you create a workflow, you don't automatically have data in the workflows, right? It takes some time to gather that data and collect that data. So we kind of had to wait, right? We had to wait a little bit of time to get people to start using them, start putting their data in them. Now what? So we have the data in there. Now we need to get the data out. And that was, something we had to learn as we went. One of our biggest questions was, what about management review? So our management review process was one that we had developed with our system with the access databases. It was one that our management actually liked. It was a gradual process in developing what they wanted to see and what they wanted presented to them. And so we had to figure out how we're going to do that with Qualtrax, because we went from access databases that very easily went into Excel without a whole lot of data manipulation. So then we had to say, what about management review? So now we're going to talk about the system that we had, what our management liked. Then we'll show you how we set it up in Qualtrax, and then we'll show you the Excel piece. So Cullyn's going to take over from here and talk a little bit about the system that we had in place, and then we'll talk about how we recreated that with Qualtrax.
All right. Howdy. Howdy. Getting there. All right. So what we had in place and the requirements, talk about the requirements of the two different standards that we were following. Some of you, these will look very familiar to people, and some of the other standards, I'm sure, like ISO 9001, similar requirements. So in 17025, the inputs, so these are all things we have to have in our management review, shall include any changes in the internal and external issues relevant to the laboratory, fulfillment of objectives, the suitability of our policies and procedures, status of actions from the previous management reviews, the outcome of internal audits, any corrective actions, assessments from external audits or external bodies, changes in the volume and type of work, customer and personnel feedback, and these are all from the new standard, right? 2017. Complaints, effectiveness of implemented improvements, adequacy of resources, results of risk identification, that's a new one for everybody. Outcome of the assurance of the validity of the results, and other relevant factors. So anything else we want to throw into this bucket. So with AAVLD and ISO, they used to be very, very closely related as far as the inputs and the outputs of the management review. With the new version of ISO, they're slightly off. They're looking at updating AAVLD to more closely match 17025, but that's not in place yet. So right now we have two systems that are kind of askew. That's all right, we just keep a list of those requirements. So for AAVLD, suitability of policies and procedures, reports from the managerial or supervisory personnel, internal audits, corrective and preventive actions, assessments from external bodies, the results of interlaboratory comparisons or the proficiency tests, changes in the volume and type of work, client feedback, complaints, and other relevant factors. So that last bucket that everything gets thrown into. So those are all the requirements out of the 2 standards that we're trying to meet. So how do we do that? Well, we try to work under the KISS theory as much as possible. So we create an agenda that meets all those requirements of the inputs and outputs, and then include the stuff that's specific to us that we want to see. So not only has the requirements from the 2 standards, but anything else that we really want to look at. So we create a folder for this agenda. So we have an agenda item, Word document with these topics on it, Roman numerals here, and then we have folders, and we have a folder for each topic. And we go in and we'll populate these folders with the data. That way we make sure we meet all those requirements. So once we have it set up, then every time we have our management review, just go through and make the checklist and make sure everything goes into these folders so that when an outside auditor comes in, they can say, let me see your internal audits, and we can scroll right into here, and here they are. So they can't, everything is easy to find. Easy to know where we're at as opposed to just one big pool of stuff. And we collect the information for each folder. So for TVMDL, the management reviews that we capture in our Qualtrax workflows, and then we export to Excel and summarize with the pivot table. Outcome of internal audits, corrective actions. So these are all these workflows that we have that we're capturing data. Customer and personnel feedback. Any complaints. The results of risk, that's a new one for us. Interlaboratory comparison or proficiency tests. And what some of those reports look like. This one in particular is the internal audits. So we have a lot of Excel data or data in Qualtrax. We export it, we summarize it, and this is what it looks like. So this is the number of nonconformances for these sections that Casey mentioned before. So we break them down by section so we can kind of zoom into where we may have issues. These are the nonconformances, and this is from all sources. So we have nonconformances that are related to feedback. We have nonconformances that come from audits, internal audits and external audits. And we summarize all those, and this is the one we'll walk through in detail here in a moment. Summarize all those, and we present this type chart, this type graph to the management review meetings. So they can focus in on where do we need to focus our resources, where do we need to aim our resources to try to make improvement, that continual improvement to our laboratory. This is a client feedback report. Along these lines, when we're collecting the data in Qualtrax, whoever's initiating the workflow will select the most appropriate subject or category, and that helps narrow it down as far as when we want to report on this, what it looks like. Risk and opportunities. So these particular risk and opportunities, we started capturing them in Qualtrax through our corrective action process. So in the workflow, we've added a field for our risk and opportunities. And this is summarized for the management review. We just run a report, summarize it, and here are all the ones that we want to consider during the management review and what do we want to do about them, or if anything about them. Proficiency testing, summarized with the pivot table. So these are all the proficiency testings. This is an old report. So these are the dates that it was due, and we highlight anything that was past due at the time. This one has actually a slicer embedded in it, so you can select the different ones, because a lot of these reports will email out to the sections, to the individual users, so they can drill into this, and it's not just presented to the management, but actually down to the supervisors and section heads where they can look at this data too. So how do we do all this in Qualtrax? So that's what the reports looked like before. That's what we're trying to recreate. So how do we do this? So first we need to set up Qualtrax appropriately. We have custom fields. Custom fields, for those of y'all, they're set up in Qualtrax. You can create whichever fields you want to and then set those up in workflow to collect your information. We use the custom fields consistently across the different workflows. So there's one particular field name for nonconformances, and we use that in all the different workflows. All right. Do you want to take over now?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, this was
We were
Casey's
supposed to
section.
switch, but that's okay. He got excited.
You got a second. Okay, so we've created these custom fields. So for us, we have the laboratory location ID, College Station, Amarillo, Center, Gonzales. We have the lab sections, necropsy, analytical chemistry, toxicology. Oops. Then we create our custom fields, non-conforming work, and the non-conforming category. So this is one that we're going to talk about in more detail throughout our systems. I'm going to transition here. Sorry.
That's okay. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our non-conforming system because it might be different. I don't know how everyone has yours set up, but ours might be a little different in that we have tiers of non-conformances, okay? So we have what we call our kappa. So it is, most people call that a CAR, but we have decided to put our corrective and preventive action into the same workflow. Within the workflow, you can select corrective or preventive action, but what that allows for us to do in the same report is we can run the report on that one workflow, and then we can sort however we need to do it. So that's our first tier. Our second tier is called a non-conforming work report. So each of these is a separate workflow. We have a non-conforming work report. It's also the way that we address a corrective action. And then we have an NC work log. So you may wonder why we have 3 tiers, okay? So the reason why we have ours set up this way is because somewhere along the line, our executive management decided that, for example, when we perform an internal audit, if we see an incorrect correction maybe only one time, maybe that is not egregious as some other kinds of nonconformances, so management said, hey, let's give the sections an easier way to work through that nonconformance that isn't through a corrective and preventive action workflow. The difference is, for the corrective and preventive action workflow, it comes to QA after every step. So the workflow is initiated, comes to QA, and as quality managers, we will issue the citation against the standard, send it back to the section to do their corrective action and root cause analysis and corrective action plan. It comes to us and we'll approve their plan because their plan may be, we're just going to go talk to Bob and tell him not to do that again. And we have to say, well, it's not really a good plan because, what if Joe does the same corrective action, right? I'm sure that sounds familiar to you. So if you leave it only up to the people who have to address it, they're going to try to make that as easy as possible. So we'll talk to them if that's not a good plan, and we'll come up with a good plan that we think they can work through and actually prevent recurrence. So it comes to QA after each of those steps. For the non-conforming work report, it only comes to QA at the end. So we actually lean on our section leadership and allow them to say, this was our root cause, this was our plan, we addressed it, we know it worked, and then send it to QA at the end, and then we'll look at it and approve it. So that's why we have 2 different ways to do it. The non-conforming work log, that's our only tier that is not actually a workflow. The document is, but it's a log, and they just keep that at their lab bench, and they can write on that, or we have an electronic. The sections have said, we don't want that as a workflow. We just want to jot that down in real time if we need to. So we have that option as well. But we don't consider that and haven't defined that in our procedure as a way to address a corrective action. So it's a record of maybe they caught that a number was transposed in a particular case. They can make that change and then they want to document it because QA still gets those logs and we can look for trends. So if we see that this is happening frequently, then we may need to go back and say, why are y'all always transposing numbers on your slides? So, so it's not considered a corrective action. It's something we caught, but we do want to keep a record of it and evaluate trends. So both the NC work report and the CAPA are corrective action processes and corrective action workflows. They have a root cause and a plan. So by definition, that's what you have to address with your corrective action according to the standards. So we have 2 separate workflows for addressing corrective actions So how do we get the same consistent data across those workflows? And the answer is shared custom fields. So we have a couple of shared custom fields. Kappa nonconformance category, so that's what we call it. And we use it in multiple workflows. And then we also have the nonconforming work risks and opportunities. So we have that same custom field that we also use across multiple workflows. All right, so a little bit about our Kappa nonconforming work category. So it's a list field. And these are some of the examples. So when someone has initiated a workflow, this is one of the fields they have to choose. And we tell them, choose your best fit. If you notice, there's not an other. Because if you choose other, everybody always says other. And you don't get anywhere when you're evaluating your data if everyone always chooses other. So sometimes they'll come to us and say, which one do you think that this is? And so we'll assist with that. But so this is what we have over time determined to be the most common categories of nonconformances. So document control, using the wrong document, wrong revision, an obsolete document, process not in accordance with SOP. That's a pretty broad topic. And we've actually considered maybe we should break that one down a little bit, because that could be they're not following their SOP, or it could be maybe their SOP hasn't been updated. So they've been doing the process for a while, now they have protocol drift, we haven't updated our SOP. Or it could just be they were just ignoring the SOP and they went rogue and they were doing their own thing. So it's a little bit of a broad category, but in that you'll see in our pie graph, it's actually one of our largest categories. So that's why we're reconsidering, can we break that down a little bit more? We actually did that with document control, because you can see at the bottom, uncontrolled documents in use. So this would be someone made up their own form, and you go and you perform an internal audit, and they pull a piece of paper out of the drawer that they're using, and you're like, where does that document from? Well, we just made that, everybody in the section knows about it, everybody's using it, but it's not in Qualtrax, it's not controlled, nobody's ever seen it before. So we broke that one out of document control. We figured we needed to look at that a little bit more. And like I said, we've had a quality management system since 2006. So all of our new people, the people that have been there a long time, they've been working in a quality management system for a long time, and yet somehow they think, well, that didn't need to be controlled, did it? So anyway, so we broke that out. Test results is another category that's kind of broad. We require a Kappa, which is our corrective action, for any nonconformance regarding test results. So when you look at this, you might say, oh, TVMDL has horrible test results, but that's because we require them to do it. They can't use any of the other tiers for test results. Test results is also very broad. May want to break that down a little bit too, because you'll see not in accordance with SOPs, and test results are two most frequently cited areas of nonconformance. But test results can be, if anything went out to the client, there's many examples, but it could just be that you had a wrong ID. So maybe they didn't see at some point that those numbers were transposed early in the process, and then we reported it, and it technically has the wrong case number on your report. So we make them address that. So, and these are just the categories that we have determined are our most frequent, and then we use these in both the nonconforming work report and the Kappa workflow. Oh, and also an internal audit. So this one actually is in internal audits as well. So when we do our internal audits, we can select this. So that's another place that we have put that in, where QA is a little bit more involved, and we can say, we can cite that same list. And so here's our screenshot from Qualtrax. So most of our custom fields, and we were advised to do this when we first set up our Qualtrax, so many of you probably have yours the same way. At the very beginning in the title, we have what workflow it goes with. So all the ones that are just the Kappa workflow will just say Kappa. We have separate ones for non-conforming work report, and they just say non-conforming work report. So this one, these shared ones, we kind of had to think about it a little bit. What are we going to call these shared custom fields? And for this one, we just called it, you know, what made the most sense. But then we used it in multiple places. All right, so non-conforming work risks and opportunities. So this was a new one for us. I don't know if we got lucky or unlucky, but when the timing of our 17025 assessment was such that we had about 3 months to conform to the new standard. Because it was, what was it, October 1st? Or
Yeah, the cutoff. We were just under the cutoff.
so if you're before October 1st or September 1st, you can use the old standard. If you're after, you have to conform to the new standard. And it basically gave us about 3 months to get trained, update procedures. I think it might be good news, and then it was also the auditor's first assessment under the new standard. So she was like, that's probably gonna work, you know. So we got a little bit of grace, I think. But it was kind of a rush to get ready for that assessment last year. So we added this to a few of our workflows as well. It's a text field. So we may eventually, once we gather data, like I said, it's pretty new. So we have less than a year of data collected for this particular custom field. Ideally, it would be a list field, the same as we did for the previous category, so that we can really narrow things down. But I think we have to gather data before we know what to put in the list. So right now it's a text field, and then we, you know, when we're reporting it, we basically have to run a report and then read the text and make some summaries. So we're hoping that as we go forward, we can create a list with this one as well, and it'll make it a little bit easier on us. But we have to gather that data first. So the workflows that we have this shared field in are our CAPA workflow and our NZ work report. We've thought about putting this in internal audit, but we're not. We'll have to just give this some more time. I think we need to collect data. We need to see what categories this can fit in, and then we can pick what other workflows that we want to put it into. But right now, we just have it in our non-conforming work. All right, so that's how we set up our workflows. It's very general. We're happy to answer other questions. But then we had the second piece. So as you saw in what Cullyn demonstrated a minute ago, our management likes graphs. So they just want to see colorful graphs, and then if they have questions about it, they want us to drill down, and we have it set up so that we can actually drill down to it, get case numbers, get workflow numbers, and then we can go back to Qualtrax and get those details. So now we have to get it out of Qualtrax, put it in Excel, and make it look the way that our management wanted it to look before we transferred. So Cullyn is our resident Excel expert. So he's going to show you how we created the reports and how we get into Excel.
Make sure I transition on the appropriate time this time. All right, so for creating the reports, we use a report designer. We include our custom fields, the custom fields that we created, and make sure that each report that we create includes that shared custom field. We also set up filters and make sure we include filters for us, you know, the date is important to us, the current step. We like to see that type of information to filter out things that might be in progress, or if I'm just looking for a specific year. So you can set your custom filters to narrow down whatever data you're looking at, so you don't have to export the entire data set out of Qualtrax. So in Qualtrax, when you're setting up the report or creating a report in the report designer, so here's all the fields that are available. The particular shared custom field that we're looking at, or we're going to summarize on, is that CAPA nonconformance category subform. So for us, we set it up as a subform. We've been talking about this setting up as a category, and this is it document control or is it records, those type things. Well, keep in mind, we also have all the details. So we have the details of the nonconformance. The who, what, when, where, and why, not necessarily the why, but the who, what, when was the nonconformance, but then we want to just give it a broad category so we can kind of narrow it down. So to set those up in the report designer, we also want to put those filters that I mentioned. You want to know, is it active, is it still active, or is it closed? The current step, We have multiple steps in all of our workflows, so sometimes we like to filter on a specific step or steps before we export that data. Who initiated it? So just different things that we choose to narrow those fields down before we run the report. Once the report is created, and we're going to run the report, so for those of y'all that might be new, so under reports, and our version is an older version of Qualtrax. We're still using the classic view where the menu bar is across the top. So reports up here at the top, then select the workflow that you're going to run on. So we have lots of, if you don't see them all here, but we have lots of reports that we've created, custom reports. Yeah, all these CWs, those are all mine. So, and those, we create the reports, typically it's just for us. So QA has many, many reports. For the sections, they have just a few. So select the reports, then select the workflow tab, and then select the specific report that you want to run. You click run. From there, for us, we select the date. So typically when we're running a management review, we just back up 1 year. If for some reason the managers or whomever just wanted to see, 6 months, 2 years, we can filter that down to a specific date range. But we go, for our reports, we go year to year. So for instance, I'll go April 1st, 2018 through April 1st, 2019 and select run and just pull that report out. So once you get your dates in or whatever type of filters you've set up, hit run report. When you run the report, and I don't have the screenshot of it here, but down below you'll see all the data in Excel, in Qualtrax, which is fine to look through. However, for us, we want to get it out to Excel, and Qualtrax makes this really easy. They have this great big button up here that says export to Excel. So select that, and it'll kick your report out of Qualtrax into, at the bottom of your browser, will look something like this. This particular one is Google Chrome, so it comes out at the bottom. Here's my Excel report. Once I select that to open it, this is what it looks like. And I'm going to actually open a report here in a moment, but I want to show you what we're going to see. So it looks something like this. And if I zoom into a little more data, it's just a big, huge table from that particular workflow. All right, so let me escape out of there. All right, so this is that report, and once you click on that, this is what it looks like. So if I zoom way out, this is our data. Just a lot of information, which is fine. However, we want to see the summary information. We'll come back to the details. With our particular workflows, because we have forms and subforms, we have lots of tabs that Qualtrax will export out. So for us, we're going to summarize on this tab here. So you'll have to find the tab that you want, which one's important to you. And we're going to summarize on the kappa nonconformance. And if you'll notice in here, if I scroll down to the bottom, there are 83 records. We're on row number 84. We have a header row, so that's 1. So we have 83 total records. So keep that in mind as we summarize this information. With Excel, once you export this, you can see the blue rows across the top here. If you select anywhere underneath the blue rows, you can follow these next steps and Excel will figure out what you want to do and help you along. If you select over here where there's not a full data set of rows and columns, Excel gets very confused or it doesn't bring you the information that you want. So select your data anywhere under the data set. One other thing to keep in mind with pivot tables in particular is if you were to add a row, pivot tables have to have a row heading or a column heading. So you can't have a blank space. So where's my cheat sheet to make sure I follow all the same steps. I don't want to skip things. All right, so we've opened the file and we're going to insert a pivot table with pivot chart. So from up here, go to Insert. Here's pivot tables. There's recommended pivot tables, so Excel kind of guesses, like, hey, this might be useful for you. So you can select that, and it'll show you can pick one of these if you want. Like, hey, here's some things you might want to choose. We're not going to do that. We're going to go to, so we selected Insert. We're going to go over here to Pivot Chart. And we're going to do Pivot Chart, because we want the pivot table and the pivot chart. So as you can see here, the blinking or dotted polka dot line, Excel has guessed, it's made its best guess at what data it thinks I'm looking for based on where the cursor was. So provided all your data is in rows and columns, it will select all of it. So if I scroll down here to row 84, whoops, not that far, you can see that it's got all the way down to 84. So I've got all of them. Say OK. And this is the table, or the sheet that you come up with. You see down here at the bottom, it's inserted a brand new sheet because I left it at the defaults, and that's what it does. So from here, over here on the far right are the fields that you can select from. So if I go back to the original data set, go back up to the top, you can see these 1, 2, 3, 4 columns that we have. If I go to my sheet, go to the sheet, I have those same 4 columns. So that's why it has to have a header on it. Okay. I personally always like to sum on the ID. So I take the ID, and you can drag and drop with this version of Excel. So you can drag and drop the ID in here, and it starts creating the pivot chart and the pivot table. So this is the sum of ID. Because Qualtrax gives everything a number, Excel has guessed, it's made its best guess. It's like, hey, you got a number, we're going to add it up for you. I really don't want that. That means nothing to me. This big, huge number over here, that doesn't mean anything. I need something a little more relevant. So if you click on that, it'll bring up a menu, and you can do show field settings or value field settings, and you can select count. Say OK, and now I have those 83 records. So it's counted those records as opposed to summing them for you. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is add my category. So the nonconformance, which one is that? Category, nonconformance category. So grab it, drag it down here and drop it, and now I have document control and the number of nonconformances for this particular data set. So whatever that date range was, that's what it's pulled out, that's what it's exported to Excel, that's what I have here. Okay. What else was I going to show you guys? All right, the other thing, pie chart. So it depends on what type of graphical displays you want to show. So changing this to a pie chart, go to design. Here's your pivot table tab. So this is everything to do with the pivot table and the pivot charts. If you select outside of the pivot table or pivot chart, you don't have that same menu. So you have to be selected inside either that data set or the graph, and then you have the pivot table tools. Oops, go to design, change chart type, and we're going to make this a pie chart. Say OK. All right, then from there, so that's looking a little bit better. Make this a little bit bigger. And if we want to put the data set around the columns instead of over here on the side, you can change over here in design, you can change your chart type. So hit the drop down, select whichever one's appropriate for you. We're going to select this one. This a little bit bigger. So now we have our pie chart. Some of these that are covering up each other, leader lines are already set up on this. So if you select one of these and move it over, it has the leader lines already built in. Right? So you can move them around, you can rearrange them so that they're in a better order. If you don't like all of these together here, because there's a bunch of small ones really together, you can move these around to get them in a different order. All right, so these two work hand in hand. Changes over here immediately take place over here. All right, so you can change this title. These are NCRs. And you can put the date range or whatever's appropriate to your management. All right. If there's something in particular you don't want to see or want to see in a different way, you can filter this information. Say, for instance, the equipment. We're not going to discuss equipment in this particular meeting. So you can select that and take that off completely. So again, immediate changes here are immediately reflected here. All right. Let's put equipment back. So one other thing in the initial data that we had was we had not just the count, but what is it as a percentage of everything. So over here I have the count of ID. So I'm going to grab ID and I'm going to drop it in here again. So now I have the count of ID as well as the sum of the ID. Let me move you this guy over. So here's the sum of ID. And again, I'm going to change it back to I want it to count. So I click on it, go to the value, change this to count. And then also, I don't want the same information twice. I want it as a percentage. So if you look here, there's a show value as. Right now, it's show value as no calculation. If you hit the drop down, you have a choice. You can do percent of grand total, column, row. So there's lots of different things that you can choose from to show that. So we're going to do it of column. So now I can see that document control 3% or three nonconformances or 3.61%. During the management review, this always comes up. Well, what is that number? I see that big number there, or that small number, or what is that? What are the details of that? With pivot tables, it's another thing that's really nice about them, is if I'm looking at this particular 12, if you double click on it, it zooms in to exactly what that information is. So you can scroll this over to the side, and you can read these, because again, the managers say, well, what is that? What happened there? Click on it, this is what makes that up.
Love it.
All right, so, and if you click on these, you can just read them through however you want to look at it with Excel. That gives you the information of the details of that particular nonconformance. Whenever you click on it and it zooms in, it creates another sheet. You'll see this is sheet 2. Sheet 1 has the pivot table with the chart. If I do this again, it's going to create yet another sheet. So now I'm at sheet 3, and it'll just keep adding sheets. As you go through this, you just right-click and delete. That gets rid of that sheet. It doesn't delete any of your data. You can get rid of that one. Right? So this one is what we want to keep. So I save these files, and then I go back in and I populate whatever folder that was with this data, and this is the data that's presented during the management review. Where are we at time-wise? I never saw a card. Okay. All right, any questions on that? Excel, pivot tables? Yes, ma'am.
First of all, excellent presentation. What were those 4 categories that you had up top, the 4 top rows?
The top rows? Okay, so these top rows here, these come from the subform. So Qualtrax populates that information. So it comes out of Qualtrax based on how your workflow is built. Did that answer your question?
Well, let me write them down. Maybe I can figure them out.
Okay. So this is a particular Qualtrax ID. So if I go into Qualtrax and type that number in, it will pull up that workflow. Subform row number 1. So this particular ID could have multiple rows in it. So for this one is 1. Let me make this a table right quick. And we'll look at something with a 2. Oh, so there's 2s and 3s. So let's go to something with a 3. 51644. So let me show you what that looks like here. All right, so for this particular non-corrective action, there were 3 identified non-conformances. So they rolled them all up in one. So here's row 1. This was the details of that non-conformance. Row 2 and row 3. So one corrective action has 3 rows of non-conformance. They're all related. That's why we let them do it that way as opposed to a 1-to-1. But it's a subform, and that's why it pops out like this. 1 workflow, 3 rows of non-conformances. That answer your question?
Yeah.
Maybe?
Yeah, I understand the concept. I just wanted to know those, what titles you have top. But you're finding out the errors, and you're giving you're putting it in certain categories.
Yes.
But one instance could have multiple categories.
Yes. One workflow could have multiple non-conformances as well as different categories. So, but we allow the user or the initiator to manage that as one workflow. So, all right. Other questions? All right. Thank y'all very much. How much time do we have? Well, I could show something I was piddling with earlier today, something kind of fun. Well, sort of fun. So for this, not this user group, but everybody here in the user group, something you can do with pivot tables with the Qualtrax system that's in place. So talking about taking data and summarizing it, or using pivot tables to summarize this information. So to ask the question, what's the most popular name here in the conference? First name.
Joe.
Users' names. Joe? John. No? Anybody else guess? First names. Okay. So let's see what we have. So in the current version of Qualtrax, we'll go to personnel. This is the list of all the people, right? So everybody's familiar with this. You can click on personnel. By the way, you can add custom fields in here as well, and we have lab coat sizes. We've added lab coat sizes, and we summarize as we get new people. We summarize what size lab coats do we need overall. So we put everybody's lab coat size in there, and every so often we'll summarize and see how many larges, smalls, mediums, extra talls, those type things. So with the data that we have, it's not a whole lot here, but we can do names. So we're going to export the personnel list to to Excel. We're going to view this data. So in here, this is the image. I don't know what that means, but that's the image. That's the user ID. Let me enable editing. Here's the name and the position, but there's not very many positions, so we're not going to filter on that. We're just going to go with name. I'm going to insert a column, because I'm going to take this and change it to first name and last name, because we're looking at first names and going to find out the most popular first name. Select the column of data and go to Data, Text to Columns. So we're going to change that group of text into 2 columns. We're going to go next, and we're going to change, the limiters are going to be a space. So anytime there's a space, it's going to break it into another word. That's what this is doing. So there's first name, last name, it's all in one column. We're fixing to break it into column 1's going to have first name, column 2 is going to have last name. Say next or finished or whatever you do to get to the next step. It's basically saying there's data there and it's going to overwrite it, which I don't care, that's fine. So now I have, any place there was a space, I've broken the name into 2 different things, right? So AJ, all right, so now I got first name, last name. As I mentioned a while ago, so I've added a column. I don't have a header here. Let me show you the error that you get. Insert pivot table. Let's let Qualtrax pick one for me. Excel. Yeah, so you get this error. The range you picked can't be used because basically it's not organized. I'm going to cancel that and put last name. All right, so now we have name and last name. So now we're going to try again with recommended pivot tables. So this is it picking that first picture. Well, yeah, that's not useful. That's picking the position. Like, that's really not what I want to see. So let me just build it myself. Say OK. And I want to see, I made this a little bit bigger. I want to see name here and give me the ID. Again, we're going to count the ID. So count of ID. So now we have 2 Brooks. You can scroll down through here and like, well, that's not fun. I can't really tell who the big winner is. So if I click on this, say sort Z to A. Whoops, sorry. Let me do more sort options. Sort Z to A by count of ID. So this is the count of ID, and I want to sort descending by that count. Say OK. All right, so there we go. We got 6 Kimberleys that have logged into Qualtrax. So again, it's just a way to use the data that's in Qualtrax or available anywhere, put it into Excel, and summarize it. And you can look at different things. You can pull in, I don't know, just let's see last names. See if we have more than one last name. So drop that one out. I don't want to see that anymore. I want last names. And let's do the same thing. See if we have more than one with the same last name. No. So all last names are unique. So that didn't tell us anything. Oh, did I click the wrong way? Let's go to the bottom then. Oh yeah, we do. 3 Smiths. All right, so fun with Excel and pivot tables. So granted, pivot tables are a great way to summarize your data, a lot of information. So this is the information we're summarizing. This is what it looks like here. Summarized and a simple pivot table. So, all right.
Doesn't matter.
Have any questions? I'm here all week.